Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman, live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about a very, very important story and a developing story, and that is about the Afghan peace process. Now, a couple of developments. For example, when we talk about the overall understanding of the NATO troops, the NATO commander, General Miller, has also stated that currently the strength which is in Afghanistan, they will not pull that out. And this has been supported by almost all the 30 members. Earlier, the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, also mentioned that no information has been received so far regarding the troops withdrawal that was supposed to be done on the 1st of May. Other than that, the American Secretary of State has also met. The concerned authorities spoke to the Afghan president, and he has also assured that whatever step the Americans will take will be in the benefit of the Afghan people and the Afghan government. Now, talking about the major areas of discussion in our today's program. We will only leave when the time is right, and the focus is now on how can we support the peace talks. NATO Secretary General, as I mentioned, Mr. Jens Stoltenberg. And America is committed to support the peace process, aiming for a just and durable political settlement and permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. United States will continue close consultations with Afghanistan's leaders, NATO allies, and international partners on the way ahead. U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken. Furthermore, we are conducting a rigorous review of the situation we have inherited, including all relevant options and with full consideration of the consequences of any potential course of action. This was stated by the spokesperson of the White House National Security Council. Now, what exactly is happening, where this peace process is going, what sort of hurdles it might face, or is it facing at the moment as we speak, what exactly the Afghan leadership is thinking on this particular issue, whether they really want the Afghan troops to take charge and let the foreign troops go back, or they want a certain number of troops from United States or NATO for that matter perhaps should stay in the Afghan area and look after the training and other major aspects regarding the issues. And on top, now what would be the role of Pakistan, since the Prime Minister earlier mentioned that the only way forward is regarding the consultations. It's about talks. It's about a comprehensive plan of action where the stakeholders should sit and should discuss their issues, and the comprehensive plan should be made as far as the peace process is concerned. But it seems that the things are not the way they were perceived earlier when Donald Trump, the former president of the United States of America, mentioned that he's going to pull out his troops from the Afghan soil. But anyway, to talk about this, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us Air Vice Marshal retired Faiz Amir Saab. He's a senior analyst. AVM Saab, thank you very much for your time, sir. We also have with us Ambassador Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab, a former diplomat and a very seasoned, I would say, person regarding this particular issue. Thank you so much, Naqvi Saab, for your presence, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll also be talking to Amina Khan Saiba. Amina Khan is an expert on Afghan affairs from the ISSI. Let me put the first question to you, AVM Saab. Now, since we have done so many shows on this particular issue, and every time we were pretty uncertain what exactly is going to happen. Now it seems that whatever decisions that were taken by the previous American government and whatever Donald Trump wanted regarding the withdrawal of the troops, it seems that that decision is no more relevant, and most likely the Biden administration is thinking on some other lines. Your take, sir?
Well, Faisal, you will have to see the change in stance in the larger U.S. foreign policy. As you see at the larger picture, while on the one hand you see on our west the American policy towards Iran a bit softening up and allowing the Europeans to start negotiations with Iran. On our east and north, probably the American policy remains unchanged. That is, the Americans would continue to seek new ways of engaging China. And in that manner, now what one wants to see is that earlier the establishment, the military establishment and political military establishment agreed on withdrawing troops from Afghanistan while it felt confident of restraining China in East. But now what you see today is that now that you see it with the withdrawal of troops announced by no, deferred withdrawal of troops announced by the European Secretary General, NATO Secretary General, what you see is that probably now when you look at the background of the talks with the Iran, you see that probably the Americans would be asking for some more space from the Iranian government in Afghanistan so that they are able to isolate the Taliban's and pressurize Taliban's to reduce violence and come in a more docile way on the negotiating table. Now, what the Biden government wants is not to own the Trump agreement with Taliban. It would like to give it a shape of its own. And that shape of its own, probably it's in agreement with the Europeans that they need to put more pressure on Afghan Taliban so that they reduce the violence before they come to table for talks. Now, whether that is going to work or not, the uncertainty remains, but most probably the Taliban are not going to agree to a deferred troops withdrawal beyond the 1st of May. So what we see in future, as we've been predicting the uncertainty in Afghanistan, that uncertainty remains. It may probably become more as far as the Afghan people is concerned, because the Taliban, whose only tool or weapon remained the violence and insurgency, probably, and which they did not compromise, though they did not attack the American troops, but they continued to use their force against the Afghan forces. That will continue and that might escalate. Now, what the Americans want to achieve by remaining in Afghanistan, pressurizing the Taliban through Iran and Europe, that probably might fire back. So what I see is presently that the uncertainty in Afghanistan is going to prevail, and though the Biden government will try and give a new shape, a new face to the agreement with Taliban, which has the Biden stamp and not the Trump stamp.
All right. I mean, primarily trying to steal the show. That's what I've understood. Now, Sarwar Naqvi Saab, couple of points. I mean, one is regarding the statement issued by Mullah Abdul Ghani Brother. And he says that there was this 11-point letter written, and in which he has very categorically mentioned, and he has talked about very important issues. And he says that, you know, we should always stand by the commitment made in Doha by the Americans and the other concerned authorities, and the troops withdrawal should take place in May this year. But it seems that that is not going to happen. Now, on the other hand, sir, when we hear that XYZ, almost 5,000 is what the number is, prisoners have been released by the government, an exchange has taken place, but the violence hasn't come down to a certain level. I mean, there are issues from both the sides. The Taliban, obviously, they want to put pressure on the foreign troops, whereas when it comes to the NATO troops or the allied forces, they have their own agenda. But, sir, if the government understands what exactly the Taliban want, obviously, one is that they don't want anything beyond the borders of Afghanistan. They want all the non-state actors to be out. They don't want any foreign troops on Afghanistan's soil. But another important area, sir, he has also talked about the press freedom. He has talked about the women's rights. He has talked about the poppy cultivation in Afghanistan. These are the major areas they want to address. So don't you think enough to be offered from the Taliban side, sir? And now the ball is in the court of the United States of America.
Yes, I think you see the broader geopolitical context as outlined by my colleague and dear friend, APM Faiz Amir Saab. is very valid, and that is probably behind much of the motivation that the U.S. Administration, the new U.S. administration, has articulated. Now, Mullah Brother, yes, has his uh, gripes or his concerns or his uh, disgruntlement at many things. And the Americans, on the other hand, are particularly worried about the violence level, which has not abated. And they are also sort of looking at the other aspects of which has been spelled out by the Afghan government, other aspects of uh, Taliban behavior in regard to women's rights, human rights, regard to civil society, and all these matters. So I think now the two forces are confronting each other with their individual or separate demands or expectations. Uh, the ground is pretty uh, murky. There are all kinds of things, and this morning I attended a talk by the Ahmad Wali Masood, the brother of Ahmad Shah Masood at the Institute of Strategic Studies, and he was explaining that it's not just the Afghan government and the Afghan Taliban uh, who are the stakeholders. There are there are 14 to 36 ethnicities and warlords and individuals and tahriks and movements and whatever have you. So all of them have to come together to a concerted position and object of achieving peace in a manner in which they all meet, get some of their needs or demands, and they compromise on the others. So it's going to be a process of give and take, and that is what is holding up the intra-Afghan dialogue, for example. Now, going back to the February 29 agreement of 2020, that is already looking like its history. And I think behind it was the ambitious and very energetic special envoy, U.S. special envoy, Zalmay Khalilzad. It had his stamp because it wanted to precipitate action. And, it reminded me a little bit of what Mountbatten did to India when he was Governor General. He rushed everything. The date of our independence would have been sometime in June 1948 for both India and Pakistan. But Mountbatten advanced the date, so many months. So Zalmay was in a rush, and he did the February 29 agreement to try and make all of them agree on certain points. But those points did not materialize, like the release of the political prisoners on the Taliban side. Then the Afghan government was very unhappy because the political prisoners were those who were hardened criminals who had carried out violence attacks everywhere. So I think the path to peace is strewn with all kinds of pitfalls and hazards, and it is still a long way
process, sir, because this has been
for all
on for
this
such a
to
long time.
materialize.
I'll get back to you, Sarwar Naqvi Sahab. Let me also engage Amina Khan Saiba, an expert on Afghan affairs from ISSI. Thank you very much, ma'am, for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Now, the point is that one issue, the major issue, which the Americans believe that the Taliban, they are not bringing any reduction as far as violence is concerned. A lot of civilians are being killed. A lot of troops are under attack almost on daily basis. Whereas the Taliban believe that the promise earlier made by the US government regarding the withdrawal of the troops, they might not stick to that, and there could be some sort of a different situation developing, and they also warn of war if US breaches that particular contract. Now, two major areas. On the other hand, when you listen to the Americans, they say that, well, whatever is happening inside Afghanistan regarding the violence, Taliban are supposed to be blamed for that. Now, the equation seems to be pretty confusing for almost all the people. Where exactly this peace process is heading, or do you believe that there is a high probability that this could also be derailed? Your take, ma'am.
Let me just begin by saying that violence is a major, major issue. And time and again, I think the issue of violence has been brought up. And this is something that obviously is derailing the process. Now, if we see since the signing of the agreement, the Taliban have significantly reduced attacks against American forces, and this has been acknowledged by the previous, Trump administration. However, and they've done so because they justify this by saying that it was, a part of the agreement. But they have continued to attack Afghan National Security Forces, and this has been problematic and I think very contradictory on the part of the Afghan Taliban. Because if you can sign an agreement with the Americans, the same country that in fact invaded you and overthrew you from power, then you shouldn't be able to differentiate and be able to justify killing your own Afghans, but then not killing the Americans. So overall, the fact is that they have to reduce violence, and they haven't done so. This is a major factor, and I think the Biden administration...
And what could be the reason for that? They still want to exert some sort of pressure on the...
Yeah. Yes, well, I think the whole one is it's a very unrealistic and silly justification, if I may say, because they say that they do not believe in the government of Kabul because it's a puppet government. But again, as I said, it's contradictory because they've signed an agreement.
But at the end of the day, they're dealing with them also, ma'am.
I beg your pardon. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'm saying that at the end of the day, the Taliban are also dealing with the same government, whether they believe it's legitimate or illegitimate.
No, that is my point. I'm saying it is very contradictory on the Taliban side, and I think this is a weak point. I feel that the Taliban should reduce violence not as a sign of weakness or a sign of surrender, but rather to portray themselves as the more responsible actor and someone or a group that can have, a future in the polity of Afghanistan. However, I think the onus is also on the Americans because I feel that the previous administration did not put enough pressure on the Taliban to reduce violence. And I'll come back to the agreement that was signed. I think one of the mistakes of the agreement signed in Doha was that it should have been signed once there was some sort of an agreement or willingness from the Taliban to reduce violence. And I think it was done in a very haphazard manner, and this gave the Taliban, this extra leverage. And of course, the Taliban don't want to reduce violence because they want to have more leverage on the negotiating table. But I feel that this could be a major stumbling block because the Biden administration has been very clear on this particular issue that there has to be a major reduction in violence. And let me just add here that while the Taliban keep on asking the Americans to honor their side of the agreement, again, I say the Taliban also then have to come forward and honor their side of the agreement. And I feel they haven't been. While I understand that the exchange of prisoners was a major hurdle, but again, all the onus cannot be just on, Kabul side. The Taliban have to deliver on this front. And while the Taliban, you had mentioned earlier that the Taliban have said that, talking about women's rights and, the Constitution, this isn't the first time that, statements like this are coming out from the Taliban. The first time they made such statements was in the Moscow process. But again, I say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And while the Taliban can assure that, there's going to be women's rights, and they talk about nationalism and a consensus government, which Abbas Tanakbeh has time and again said, we will have to see how much the Taliban are actually willing to do. And again, I say, they should reduce violence to some extent. Again, to prove themselves and to show that they're the most responsible stakeholders in this entire equation.
Now, coming to you, AVM Saab, now there is a very interesting situation. This equation tells us that, for example, if there is no deal or there's some sort of a misunderstanding or there's some sort of a conflict of interest for that matter, which is very much there, we have always studied about this phenomena of spring offensive. February is almost ending, sir. March is about to start. Do you think if current situation prevails for another couple of weeks, the Taliban, they'll be indulging themselves into that spring offensive, and that is going to be the major, I think, 6 to 8 weeks, where violence would be the key factor, sir. And that could definitely create a lot of differences within the two major parties, the USA and the Taliban. AVM Sab, your take.
Well, Faisal, the Taliban had never projected as winning of the hearts as their main weapon. They have always believed and displayed that belief in their ability to fight in all circumstances. So, if we say that there'll be any renewed violence, yes, there will be probably, if not renewed, even the existing pace of conflict, armed conflict, I would say, because they're fighting mostly against the Afghan troops. So the present state of armed conflict is likely to continue at varying levels of intensity. Now, going back to the Americans, what a similarity a pattern that I see is when Mr. Trump came into power, he changed the American policy of Mr. Obama, and he allowed his field commanders to dictate the pace of the war. And that he demonstrated by dropping the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan. And he thought that the increased violence by the American state, the increased intensity in air attacks would probably subdue the Taliban. That did not happen. And now what the pattern is repeated now, but on a different scale. It means the present government, the new Biden government, has gone back on the agreements of the previous government. And now the bombshell that it has dropped, it says unless the conditions are good, we are not going to pull back. We're not going to talk about the withdrawal of troops. Now, who is going to define the conditions that will enable the Americans to withdraw their troops? That's obviously remains with the Americans. So the situation that you see is a chicken and egg, that whether the Americans submit to the Afghan demands or the Taliban's probably or reduce their intensity of their armed conflict with their government. Now, here I find the another change happening here in this region. Now, with the US and NATO both being reluctant to withdraw their troops and give a momentum to the peace process, Pakistan becomes the main driver of progress in peace in the region. Pakistan will have to work with the US on whatever policy turns they take, regime after regime. They have been changing their policy, and Pakistan has been modifying its working conditions, is concept of operations with the Americans and adopting to their demands. Pakistan will also have to keep the Taliban interested in peace talks, because past we have seen that Pakistan's persuasive conditions or efforts have played their dividend and brought the Taliban to the table. Pakistan will also have to reassure the present Ashraf Ghani government that Pakistan will not let its relationship deteriorate anything beyond what it is now. While doing all these things, while remaining the main driving force in peace talks in Afghanistan, Pakistan will also have to make sure that the Indians don't take advantage of this vacuum that is happening now. Because
but how can we make sure that we have been saying that India is a spoiler for a very long time? Indians have, whatever they have done, sir, we all know. After the visit of Ajit Doval, the Indian National Security Advisor, things have drastically changed in Afghanistan, sir, from good to worse, I would say. And now look at the condition right in front. When we talk about the US Defense Secretary, Mr. Austin, General Austin Lloyd, I mean, very categorically, he has said that we are reviewing the situation. We'll talk to all these stakeholders. He was referring to the NATO allies. But, sir, when it comes to the Russian interest or the Chinese interest or the Pakistan interest, or for that matter, the Iranian interest, what sort of an equation do you see developing in the future, sir? Do you think these major four stakeholders will be on board, or do you believe that without the consultation and the support of Pakistan, this peace process cannot, come to a proper logical conclusion?
it's not any likely in the near future that all these stakeholders will be sitting together and trying to resolve the Afghan situation. As I mentioned earlier, the Americans, while they have allowed the Europeans to talk about JCPOA, and they've said that they will join the talks when the talks reach a critical stage. Obviously, that's not the only interest that the Americans have in the region. So they probably on the back door would be talking to Iran's about its movements in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Lebanon. So those talks behind the door, those talks are going. Now, if the Iranians, let's say, agree on a give and take and give some more space to Americans by not supporting, not actively supporting any group in Afghanistan, that is it likely that the Chinese will move in, Russians will move in more to fill that vacuum, that the Iranian absence will take place. So what you see is getting the situation more complex. What one saw in the just recent past, the only path to peace was that the Afghan Taliban and Afghan government, they sat together to negotiate, and they took about 3 months. They about took 6 months after the February 29th peace treaty. They took 6 months to come back to the table and start talking to each other. They took another 3 months to come to a conclusion how the talks should proceed, and then they exchanged the agenda of the talks. So that seemed like the only way the peace could be achieved in Afghanistan and in the region, in the broader region. But now with the American reluctance, or maybe the delaying of starting their negotiations with Taliban, the things again go uncertain. Certainly, China would be interested to gain more ground. So would be the Russians, and probably the Taliban would not like to lose or not like to lessen their grip over the Afghan government in the past year or so. And we're just 10 days away from the anniversary of the treaty. So let's hope that soon after that, the Biden government lets Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad come back to the region and start the negotiations.
Now, Naqvi Saab, when we talk about the non-state actors who are present in Afghanistan, you talk about Hizbul Tahrir, you talk about Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, you talk about a couple of other splinter groups, whether you talk about Shariar Masood or Saifullah, or then you talk about the presence of Daesh, and so many other groups that have, they have united and they have been supported by the Indian Raw Agency, financed, equipped. They are assigned certain targets to make sure that there should be no peace in Afghanistan, A, and secondly, to destabilize Pakistan. Now, obviously, the peace process is linked with peace in Pakistan also. My point, sir, my question here is that when you hear the Taliban saying that whatever happens, if this entire process is derailed, or for that matter, if the Doha process or the Doha details or the Doha agreement, let me put it this way, the Doha agreement is, for that matter, it's not taken into account and it's abrogated for that matter, things would be totally on the Americans. Whereas when you hear whether the Secretary of State or the Defense Secretary saying that the Taliban are responsible for all the wrongdoings, the Taliban are responsible for the peace, the Taliban, they are not abiding by the commitments. And I mean, it's a blame game on both sides. This is going to eventually lead into an absolute chaos, resulting in a lot of bloodshed. Now, so that equation would be something which nobody would like to see, especially Pakistan. Your take?
Yeah, you see, Faisal, I think you are exaggerating the Indian influence on these groups, because the groups
especially
are,
on the
of
Americans,
course,
sir. Why not? I mean, Biden administration seems to be pretty close to the Indians. That is the reality.
No, but I agree that is they are in collusion. But the Indian influence on the warlords and the various groups and non-state actors, as you define them, is, I think, not likely to be that great, because they will take money from the Indians. They will benefit from India's desire to play a role, but they will do pretty much what they want to do by themselves. So that I think that is the Afghan character. It has been shown many times. Now the other thing is that the Americans and the Taliban are going to have a go at this, but the Americans are under Biden maintaining their most important trump card, and that is the presence of their troops. You see, if Trump had had his way, he would have withdrawn all of the boys to come home before Christmas.
Correct.
And by Christmas, that didn't happen because Trump was already out. He had lost the elections. So the Americans would want to maintain that presence, as you yourself said. They will use that to promote their interests. In all this, Pakistan has to be very careful. Pakistan is doing the right thing. You know, Pakistan is now befriending all different groups, not just the Taliban. We have had here Rabbani, and we have had Khalili, and we now have Masood, Wali Masood. So we have these different prominent Afghan leaders who have been coming to Pakistan. Zalmay comes here regularly. So we have broadened our reach into Afghanistan, and yet we maintain that the peace will be Afghan led and Afghan owned. So we will not have anything to do directly with whatever is agreed, and there the Afghans have to work it out themselves. Pakistan, I think, is doing more or less taking the wiser course and doing the wiser thing. But the whole situation is very murky, and there are lots of pitfalls along the way, and Pakistan has to be very careful in dealing with all that. So that is the broad picture. You see, it's interesting, it's ironical that the two prominent parties in the present, the two prominent stakeholders that have emerged in the present situation, Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban, they both were out of the Bonn conference and out of the entire system that was put in place in Kabul, the constitution, the government. I mean, this was all done by the Americans without.
Naqvi Saab, don't you think that the equation could take a very different turn, and these two major stakeholders, the Afghan Taliban and the government of Pakistan, at some stage would lose the edge? Violence could take place, and then again, the American firepower we are all aware of, and whether it has been a success story or not, but that's the tool they have to twist the arms of the Taliban, and massive aerial campaign, bombing or something of that sort might start. Just to bring them back on the negotiation table, and then talk to them from a position of strength rather than giving that position of strength to the Taliban, one. And secondly, sir, when you talk about the Pakistan's role, I believe that in the future you never know if there is a conflict again that takes place between the Americans or the Afghan Taliban. They'll end up blaming Pakistan, and they would ask Pakistan to do more, take actions against the Haqqani network. Though I think Haqqani network, those leaders, they have played a brilliant role so far. Naqvi, a quick comment on this.
Yeah, you see, you are right. I mean, this is one possibility, one course that might develop. But Pakistan, as I said, is reaching out to the other Afghan leaders, the other Afghan factions, and the tanzeems, and all the stakeholders in the Afghan political situation. So, I think Pakistan, by the time that situation arises, where the Americans use firepower and the Taliban are hell-bent on throwing them out, which is what one course of action, one course of developments could be. By that time, Pakistan would have diversified its reach, and I think Pakistan, in any case, is not going to be determining what will happen. Pakistan is standing on the side as a facilitator, and I think that is the reasonable course of action.
All right. Now, Amina, let's throw light on one very important aspect. You know, when we talk about the Americans, they have a very clear-cut stance, and their statements are pretty calculated also. They always believe in reviewing the strategy from time to time. They always talk about, their commitment to support the peace process in Afghanistan, aiming for a just and durable political settlement, and obviously a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. Now, these are their demands. But, when you talk about negotiations, this is what Prime Minister Imran Khan has also said, that when you talk about negotiations, you need to be flexible. Let's talk about the areas where you believe both the parties can show some sort of flexibility.
Okay. Before I get into that, if I may, I just wanted to add on this.
Please go ahead,
3 points. Okay.
Please.
So first of all, we keep on talking about, the spoilers in Afghanistan. Certainly, there are many spoilers, whether they're internal or external, meaning whether we have regional countries or internal elements such as, the presence of the ISKP. But to be very honest, I think the biggest hurdle to the peace process is the disunity and the mistrust that exists between the, different Afghan factions, and in particular between Kabul and the Taliban. And the fact that both these sides could not even overcome minor issues after the Doha talks initially started shows you that this process is going to be extremely complex. It's a very fragile process, and at the end of the day, it has to be a slow process. After all, we're talking about this year will mark 20 years of bloodshed. So I think, the process should not be haphazard. It shouldn't be hasty. It should be done in a very, slow manner, because there are many, many issues that need to be discussed. And here, I think very little focus is laid on national reintegration and social healing. The Afghans have not only been at war with themselves, but of course within the region. But the biggest issue, I think, is amongst themselves. And while regional countries, or for that matter, even America, can only do so much, at the end of the day, it is the Afghans that have to work together. They have to negotiate, and they have to compromise on their principal stances. And that is not happening. And therefore, Pakistan, or for that matter, even America, cannot deliver peace. And while I know that it's very difficult and all the onus is being put on the Afghans, but do remember that, when the Doha negotiations started, both sides, particularly the Taliban, did emphasize on this point that the negotiations had to be bilateral between these two particular parties, and they didn't really want external intervention. However, that is not going to happen. We don't see it happening. The Americans, again, I say, have an onus. They need to, I think, push or put pressure on both sides when they need to, but at the same time, they need to back off and let these two sides negotiate as well. And for Pakistan, I agree with Ambassador Naqvi. I think it's important to realize that while Pakistan's position might have been vague and ambiguous in the past, I think it's very clear now. Time and again, the government has said that we have no favorites, and we're reaching out to all the different political factions. And as you have seen over the past year, we've had a number of visits, whether it's been President Ghani, Dr. Abdullah, or, for example, even Masood, who came today. So this is important to focus on. Now, I think 4 points where compromises can be made is, first of all, I think this issue of the whole troop withdrawal. I personally do not. I understand that the Taliban time and again have been saying, and this has been their principal demand, that the Americans need to withdraw. But please see the statements coming out of, Doha, and particularly Abbas Tanakzai. And he said this in the very beginning. Again, I refer to the Moscow process, where he said that while, yes, we want the Americans to leave, we will be open to some sort of American presence on our soil vis-a-vis development or reconstruction. And this is important, and I think this indicates that the Taliban might be open to some sort of U.S. presence on their terms. So I don't really see that, the Americans withdrawing completely. And then again, it's 2,500 troops. The others are more involved in, for example, training and whatnot. So this is one thing, where both sides can compromise on. But again, here I come back to the violence, and the onus is on the Taliban. The Taliban must show a visible reduction in violence. There is no justification for it. In the beginning, they used to say that we're killing or we're using our insurgency as a means to liberate the Afghans in Afghanistan. They don't need to liberate Afghanistan now because at the end of the day, it's innocent Afghans that are being killed. So I think the Taliban has to show a visible reduction in
But ma'am,
violence.
the million-dollar question is that the Afghan
Yes.
Taliban, they really want that there should be no foreign troops in Afghanistan. Simple as that. No foreign troops on Afghan soil. But again, the Americans will not leave because they have their own interests, ma'am. And secondly, they have a very genuine concern that this is what we have done earlier. And whatever happened after that, the Taliban took over, they had their government immediately accepted by the government of Pakistan, the government of Saudi Arabia, the government of UAE. Now the equation is pretty different, isn't it?
I don't think so. Faisal, that is my point. I don't think that the Americans are going to withdraw completely. And I personally believe that, yes, maybe initially the Taliban would, in order for face saving and in order to, pacify all those fighters that have been fighting for the past 19 years, they will want maybe a quick exit. But again, look at the statements coming from the Taliban leadership, where time and again they have said they are open to some sort of U.S. presence.
All right. Well, anyway, a very complex, very complicated issue. It has been there for almost 20 years. Rather, I would say more than 45 years. But let's see where it leads. At the end of the day, what this region really deserves is peace. I think enough has been done to curtail the growth and expansion of China, to put a check on Pakistan, to keep an eye on the Iranians, to be under the belly of the Russians. But for how long? Now, things are changing. I think this century is very different. The third quarter would be pretty interesting. But we hope and pray that peace prevails at the end of the day. Anyway, Amina Saiba, it was a pleasure having you. AVM Faizami, thank you so much for your presence. And great to have you, Naqvi Saab. I'll see you inshallah on Monday. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Have a great weekend. Khuda Hafiz.